So we're going to continue on with the evolution of animals. We left off last lesson with the Cnidarians and previously saw how the sponges were the first group of animals to evolve. And now we pick up where we left off. So notice where we are is where this green line is on the phylogenetic tree, indicating a characteristic that all the subsequent groups of animals have, but the Cnidarians and the sponges do not, and that is bilateral symmetry. So these groups would have come after or during, rather, the Cambrian explosion, which is not really an explosion. It has to do with the explosion of life, specifically animal life, about 535 to 525 million years ago. We can date the fossils back to that time of when the earliest fossils of many of the major groups of currently existing animals first appeared in the historic fossil records. So I'd like you to, like we did before with the Avalon explosion, where you learned first about the Ediacaran fauna, I would like you to go ahead and pause this lesson now. Watch this video on YouTube, and while you're watching, write down the characteristics of the animals that arose during the Cambrian explosion. Give examples of animals that exist today that we can trace their lineage back to that time. And also, what are the hypothesized reasons, causes of the Cambrian explosion? Now that video, if I recall, is about 10 minutes long. So then you'll be coming back and we'll start learning more about what that bilateral symmetry means and what traits these new animal forms have that weren't previous in the Cnidarians and the sponges. Okay, so if you watched the video about the Cambrian explosion, you should be ready to proceed with this lesson, because now we're going to be looking at the fossils from the Cambrian and relate that to the characteristic of having that bilateral symmetry, or we could say that they are bilaterians. These fossils, unlike the previous fossils from the sponges and the Cnidarians, were the first hard mineralized skeletons. It could be that the minerals were present in the water due to all of the tectonic activity that then allowed those skeletons to form, and that wasn't perhaps there before. In addition, we did not previously see a complete digestive tract in the sponges or the Cnidarians. Sponges don't really have digestive tracts. They basically just pump the water through their bodies and filter out the food. And the Cnidarians had an incomplete digestive tract because the mouth and anus are the single opening. But with the Bilaterians, they have a separate opening for the mouth and the anus, and that is what defines a complete digestive tract. I just moved the image. It was covering up a word there, so that word says like us. So we are bilaterians. We have a complete digestive tract and that bilateral symmetry, as well as a hard mineralized skeleton. Okay, so to recap the video, there are several hypotheses to explain what caused the Cambrian explosion, and those are emphasized here. You can compare this with your notes from the video. One hypothesis is there were new predator-prey relationships. The constant fight for survival, prey trying to evade predators, predators evolving to be able to continue feeding and have prey items. So these adaptations might have been acquired because of the need to be able to survive or defend themselves or to capture food. In addition, during the Cambrian explosion, there was a rise in atmospheric oxygen caused by the prevalence of those photosynthetic organisms like the cyanobacteria, as well as at this time, possibly terrestrial plants, but mainly it's going to be aquatic organisms that are responsible for the rise in atmospheric oxygen at this stage. So, with that oxygen, larger bodied animals that had higher metabolic needs were supposedly able to exist. And another possible hypothesis is the evolution of this gene called the Hox gene complex, which facilitated the development of new body forms. And this is a really fascinating idea. We're going to take a closer look at that. That these animals, the bilaterians that is, have a general body plan controlled by certain genes, this group of Hox genes. And they got this from their single common ancestor that had those same genes. So, for example, when you compare the body plan of the fly Drosophila to a human, you can see that the color-coded regions indicate that they have similar genes, the green ones, coding for the posterior end of the body. And then in the abdomen and interior regions between the posterior and the anterior or head, you see a pattern there from the next set, orange to blue to yellow to magenta, and the red indicating that we have similar genes controlling the development of structures on our anterior part or head. So it's very interesting. Of course, this is relatively new discoveries in science with the advent of genetic technologies and the ability to sequence genes from different animals. So it is the body plan that allows us to further categorize animals that emerged from the Cambrian explosion. And not all body plans are the same. As you saw, even the fruit fly and the human have some differences. It's just that general pattern of where those genes are from the anterior to the posterior, or from the head to the tail, if you will. So we're going to be looking at some examples of how symmetry, the types of tissues, and the presence or absence or different types of body cavities can be used as characteristics to differentiate other groups of animals that are still of the bilaterian group. They all still have bilateral symmetry. So starting with that one then, symmetry. Maybe we mentioned this before, but just for comparison purposes, sponges, phylum Porifera, is asymmetrical. They don't have any particular line of symmetry. The Cnidarians had radial symmetry. So this is when you can divide the body into different portions, more than two planes, by passing through the longitudinal axis, like shown in the diagram here, and they would be symmetrical. So they don't really have like a front, back, anterior, posterior, right, left side. They just have these like mirrored portions based on that longitudinal axis. And we've already discussed the Cnidarians, but this is why their body forms are the way they are, and that they are often sessile or planktonic. They drift or perhaps swim, but not very well. And the one shown here, that would be the polyp form. And the one that would be swimming would be the medusa, sort of an inverted polyp. But both forms still have that radial symmetry. So this is not for the bilaterians. The bilaterians have bilateral symmetry. So all the new groups we're going to be studying have this type of symmetry. So you can say that they have a top and bottom side, but the terms that are used to describe those sides are dorsal for top, ventral for bottom. They also have and then from that you can determine a right and a left side once you know dorsal and ventral. It would be like your right and your left. So if you have to imagine when you're looking at like the picture of the lobster here, it's not when you're looking at him on the right, it's like if you were the lobster, okay? Your right would be the right. You have to put yourself in their perspective when determining the right and the left side. They also have an anterior and a posterior end. So the head is the anterior, the posterior is the tail, and that's all labeled really nicely for the cat, shown here. In addition, they have a central nervous system where sensory information is received and transmitted throughout the body, and including a brain, which is when an organism has a brain in their head, it's referred to as cephalization. So that's a term we should be familiar with. So for example, the anemone, even though it had that centralized nerve net, it didn't have a brain. So it has no cephalization. It just has that nerve network. So I just want to come back to our overview slide of the other aspects of animal body plans, because we're going to pick that up with the next lesson. So we've covered the symmetry, and in our next we'll do the tissues and the body cavities.